Howdy, y'all, and welcome to Political Us. On Monday, June 22nd, Political Us hosted our first virtual town hall about race in America. Participants were asked to place themselves in one of four groups. Those that believe Black Lives Matter, those who believe all and blue lives matter, those that believe the topic of race relations in America is complicated, and the final group was for those wanting to learn more. The objective was to take the conversation offline and discuss through some challenging questions, which you can review here. Join us as we share different segments of the video over the next few days, or you can watch the entire conversation all at once. We hope you find the video as helpful as we found the town hall. What is it that you want to learn out of this town hall?
Care if I start?
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
I think for me, I've grown up probably in a very different situation from most of you guys, like growing up in England and then sort of seeing some North American culture. I've lived in Florida for a year. That's how I know Chris a long time ago, and now up in Canada. But what I want to learn, I guess, more than anything, I don't think I've ever had a true appreciation for just how different it is for people of a different race to me. I kind of always knew it probably existed, but didn't know quite to the level, and still don't know quite to the level. So I want to learn. I want to empathize. I want to be better. I want to grow. I'm not one that speaks on social media here. That is just that I don't like it as a way of communicating in general, other than like private messages with friends, because I just find it becomes very argumentative, and maybe that is something that I need to engage in more. But I don't know, as a medium of communication, I just don't like it for any topic. But I just want to understand and get just a deeper appreciation for what everybody goes through, and use that to make changes in my own life.
Great. So first of all, Chris, thank you for doing this. I think this is fantastic, and it's a great step to taking the next step in these conversations, which is kind of a difficult topic sometimes. So just want to thank you for that. So I think a lot of what Simon feels, I feel as well, is I just want to learn from people that are not on the fringes. I know so many people who are yelling on both sides, and I don't feel that helps. So I want to discuss these kinds of issues with people who are willing to actually challenge me, but not in a rude sort of way that may come down 20 years later and hurt me kind of situation.
I have a lot of Black friends, and they tell me all sorts of different things. So I'm actually more curious of how other white people are perceiving things and whatnot. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm very curious of, it's all about perspective.
And so I'm a mental health therapist. So I've been having these conversations with teenagers, young adults, and adults since the beginning. And I feel like so often these conversations have happened in the Black community, but we have not had these conversations with white people, with other races. And for me, I just want to be a part of the conversation because, like Chris said earlier, I think so often something happens, we get all riled up, and then it falls to the wayside. And so I enjoy listening to other people's perspectives. I enjoy sharing my perspective, and that's why I'm here today.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I like what Denisha said. I'm very interested in learning other people's perspectives of things. It's hard sometimes. I definitely know and am comfortable with how I feel and how I'm able to communicate in some situations. I like to think that I can communicate fairly well through social media without offending people, but Chris, I think I do sometimes get people a little riled up, and so I've been having a lot of back and forths because I don't get the opportunity often to speak about my feelings on these issues, and I think it's probably the case with a lot of us right now, that things are sort of just all bubbled up, and it's top of mind, and maybe it's a little more in our conversations than it has been usually. But I'm just looking forward to being able to converse with people, hear some other perspectives, get a little gut check for myself, make sure that I'm looking at things from a broader perspective than just my own lens. So I appreciate being here, and I appreciate you guys setting it up.
And so I'm here because I want to know how to talk to my kids about it, because I don't feel like my mom did a good job in preparing me for that. You know, she'd rather me just, you know, hide under the rug and just, you know, put those pictures away and not say a word. And I don't want my kids to grow up like that. They need to face it head on. So I'm here to learn how to approach it with my children.
For the white people on this phone call, who would say that they've ever said something derogatory towards someone on purpose? Okay. All right. So Aaron, appreciate that. And I don't necessarily mean that as in like, oh, it ended up, you know, hindsight.
No, it was college program. A roommate of mine who you probably know, I made a Mexican joke, which I thought was funny because I grew up in an all-white world. And she flat out told me, and I appreciated it, it hurt her feelings. And she explained to me how it hurt her feelings. And I realized how
Well, and I think here's what I'm asking. So, Aaron, you raised your hand, and I would actually put you in the category of, you were saying a joke, you didn't necessarily mean it as a hateful speech. But here's something that for those of you that want to learn about how other people feel about this, now I'm going to switch the question. For those of you that are non-white, how many of you have had direct experience where you were the person that has had racism put against them directly? So I think one of the big things that always gets brought up in this, and I'm sorry because that really wasn't.
So I'm Regina George?
No. Here's my point. And I had a conversation with another friend a few weeks ago that her thing was she was shocked to find out that her black friends had all experienced racism directly. And I think that's something that gets missed in this entire conversation, is that for me, for Boyae, for Shanika, for Bianca, for Denisha, this isn't something where I'm looking at a video of George and I'm upset because I see George Floyd is having racism directly affect him. I'm upset because I know that feeling. But what I'm talking about is so often it feels like racism to a lot of white people is something that, oh, I've heard it happens. But for minorities, not just blacks, but for blacks, Hispanics, Latinos in general, you know, Japanese, it only takes those bad apples and they will impact every single person. So if you don't hear anything else when you walk away from this, understand that's why there's so much anger and hurt and frustration. But often we talk about, well, you know, it's one bad cop. Okay, one racist in a community handles it for everybody. Don't worry, you're all covered. Like there is someone who will be racist for you, even if you're not. When you think about modern racism, what is it that you think it looks like?
I don't want to talk too much, so I was trying to be patient, see if anyone else had something to say. So I live in a very affluent part of Loudoun County. It's actually the richest county in the nation and the fastest growing county in the nation. And my husband is a very big black man. He is 240 pounds, 6'2", 6'3", something like that. He's huge. So we have a local restaurant. We're in Virginia. So we went to a restaurant that we frequent quite often. We're wine club members there. And one day we were having dinner and neither of us were really dressed. Like he had just came home from the gym. I was wearing kind of just like jeans and a shirt, which shouldn't matter. But we're sitting at a restaurant and the other tables around us were all white people. And so we very quickly noticed that the waitress did not want to provide service to us. Someone else cleaned our table, someone else bought us, asked us what we wanted, someone else bought us our food. And she would go to all the other tables and have long, drawn-out conversations with them. But if she had to speak to us, it was very quick. It was, do you guys need anything? And then she would leave. So I'm not big on using the race card. Like, I will come up with any other excuse. Like, maybe she's tired, maybe she's busy, like any other thing. But it was very glaring that the only thing that was different about us and the rest of her tables were we were Black. But for us, it was more, it's those little subtle things that when you're a minority, you know it because you know it, but it's so difficult to explain it to someone else. It's the, like, from the outside looking in, she was polite enough, but it was so out of the ordinary of what we were used to at that restaurant. And then being able to watch her with her other customers, it was like, it just was a very gross feeling. So I think a lot of times it's those very subtle things that happen and I think that's what modern racism looks like.
Now, modern racism is more covert than anything else. And is some, like, you have extremes, I think. So you have extremes of it's super on the sly, or you have another extreme of it's in broad daylight, but you can't prove it. So both forms of being covert.
I'm of mixed race. I'm in an interracial marriage. We get stares from time to time. My son is probably the same tone that I'm in, slightly darker than I am. We get looks about what our family dynamic looks like. My wife is sometimes often concerned about who our son is going to identify with because of that.
Yeah, I will tell you, being biracial is probably the hardest thing. Well, actually, I take that back. It's not. I don't get judged. I get questioned. I often joked in school, the hardest question on every single test at school had nothing to do with the subject. I was going to be just fine. It was mark your race. And then there are other times I have to think really hard about my answer. I mentioned before I'm furloughed right now, so I'm using unemployment. When I was asked, what is my race for unemployment, I had to think about it because I had to think about how is this going to be processed. And maybe that has nothing to do with it. But then there was also a part of me that was like, I don't want to add to the stigmatism of, well, look at all these Black people that are just mooching off the government. I think for me, modern racism is a lot smarter than people think it is. I think a lot of people think racism is about, I'm going to fly the Confederate flag, or I'm going to discriminate against you because I don't want you to drink at the same water fountain. His thing is, it's not what it was in the 60s. It's not flat out, I don't have people driving down my streets screaming, N-word this and N-word that. It's subtle. It's to Denisha's point, it's not being fully serviced the same way as everybody else in a restaurant. It's things like the terms thugs or, immigration to me is a fantastic one about how we've made immigration stands for I hate Mexicans. It's like we'll say illegal immigrants and everybody's brain just made them Mexican, even though Mexico makes up a fraction of illegal immigration. But those are the terms that are used over and over. I think modern racism is when we're talking about police reform and somebody brings up, well, Chicago kills a lot of people. That, like, I'm going to make a comment, and I just want to, I know I'm going to get head shakes, but anytime you want to watch a racist in hidden form, watch how they talk about Chicago. Because Chicago has nothing to do with most of the people that are in any conversation that you are with. But Chicago will always find its way into some conversation about Black violence. Every single time, because it's that hidden racist agenda of, I don't have anything else to say, so Chicago. I think more than anything else, when you talk about what modern racism is happening right in front of you. You don't even realize it because it sounds civil, but it's not. It's the way things are said. It's how people respond to stuff. And I think that's where we struggle more than anything else. Why do you guys think so many people steer away from conversations about race?
Scared to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, I agree, Simon. It's uncomfortable. You're scared of saying the wrong thing. It is something that we're now being taught not to see. We're not supposed to see color, or color doesn't matter. We're all the human race. We're all one people. But that's not true. I mean, it's not.
I think the other issue is it's easier to, for example, talk about statues instead of going into socioeconomics of it all.
Yeah, I think people are just afraid to offend somebody or mostly get ganged up on, which is very prevalent, especially in the online community. But I've been that guy. Like, I've been that guy so many times, and I'm like, it's so emotionally draining to just get absolutely ripped apart for something you didn't even say. It's like, I've had that happen where it's like people change the subject so they can argue with you. So it's that kind of thing that I think people are, honestly, I don't want to say it's Facebook's fault, but it's the platform of Facebook that has made it very difficult. It is not Facebook itself. You can't blame a company or a program. It is the people on it, but the platform has not helped.
Is part of the reason, especially white America, doesn't want to talk race is because it's a conversation you can't win?
Yes. And sorry, I kind of jumped on there, but I don't think it's a matter of winning and losing, but at the same time, I've had so many great conversations about race and different ethnicities and even different religions with people who have had experience with that. But then all of a sudden, it's like, again, you get those people that just want to fight. And I think that's what makes it difficult. I don't think it's a matter of winning or losing. Everybody has their different experiences. But I think that comes down to it is like it's the bullying factor that pushes people away.
I would add, I think it has something to do with feeling helpless and powerless. Even though, we're not, white people aren't the ones being attacked, we don't know what we can do about it. And so, one, it's easier not to get into the fray. And two, it's like, well, what you expect. Encouraging right now is that when you see protesters, it's all different nationalities and races and ethnicities. And it's people saying it's just injustice in general. And it's not okay to be apathetic about it. I need to express it. And so they're not afraid to, get into the fray. And I think that's where the real change happens, when it's not just one group, saying something, but it's a mass of humanity all going towards fixing the problem. And what the fix looks like, I think, is the hard part at this point. But at least we're, I think, moving in the right direction.
I guess the problem that I have talking about racism or bringing that up is, well, with white people who are racist, that's going to be an issue because they see me as a traitor. To black people, sometimes I feel like, do I need to bring out my pedigree? Do I need to bring out like a genealogy thing that says, okay, here's my ancestry. I do have a right to speak as well.
The whole thing is just making me think that part of the reason that I think some white people don't want to have this conversation is that they don't want to learn the truth about the past. They don't want to learn the truth about the history because it's all been so whitewashed. I know the history. I didn't learn about a lot of things that have gone on in American history until I got to college because it wasn't taught. And I went to an almost all-white high school and dated interracially and was called a wigger and a N lover, and actually was fired from my first job when my black boyfriend showed up. So I think it's people that, I think they don't want to admit what has gone on and learn from that to move forward, because it's embarrassing, it's uncomfortable, it's not right. And I think that people would rather push it aside and not think about it than have to deal with it face head on.
So we've talked briefly about this for a minute, but to kind of stay on the line of like, what is racism? So I mentioned, Hispanics and African Americans are typically the poster children for political issues. For Hispanics, it's typically centered around immigration and jobs. For African Americans, it's normally drugs and violence. Is that racism, or is that facts? Which one is it?
Yeah, I think it's facts that's been spun, right? I don't remember. I think it was Aaron that brought up the idea of socioeconomics. I think socioeconomics play into a lot of this, but I think the effects play out differently in different communities. And so whatever is shown as the predominant effect becomes the sort of political poster child. That's kind of the way I look at it.
And so I remember once I was an adult, I was working with this guy. He makes a lot of money, and he made some comment about how everyone has the same opportunities. And I was like, I dare you to go to my neighborhood in Brooklyn and tell those kids that they had the same starting point and the same opportunities as you. So some of it, I think, may be facts, but I think it's also facts based on we don't provide the same resources equally across the country. We don't provide the resources that are needed so that those facts aren't facts. The poorest part of our county is where the Latinos live. There are no schools that are built in that area. There are no resources given to that area. They don't have new Google Chromebooks like the rest of the county because that's where they are. And they are the problem. That's where the MS-13s, and they bring all the crime. So some of it, I think, may be facts, but like Kelly said, I think that it's very skewed facts.
Yeah, I agree with what Denisha was saying. I think some of it may be facts, but they're facts that get reinforced through stereotypes and portrayals of the way that African Americans or Mexicans or any ethnic group is kind of in a niche, and kind of get written that way in the media and in television, and it reinforces it in people's minds.
What is the purpose of the marches, of the protests, of the boycotts? What's the purpose?
So I think a lot of it is just to, again, like you said before, it's all marketing. So it's really easy to stand on a corner and be like, this is what I believe, but people won't necessarily listen to a person. They'll listen to 1,000 people, though. Hopefully, maybe. But I think it's more of an idea of getting the name out there and letting people know that the group is there and that they want to be heard.
Yeah, but I mean more specifically, right?
Okay.
So, like, I think it's all well and good to say, we want to be heard, but heard saying what?
So I think that's tricky because, I mean, you hear so much bad things about the protests and the rioters, and it all kinds of gets lumped into one, but people don't know how to differentiate. Because, like, honestly, with everybody's talking about Black Lives Matter, but to be completely honest, based upon what I have read, I still don't know what the group actually wants. Because people are yelling so much, I don't know what they want. I have no idea if it's the sort of thing that I'm like, can I help? Am I helping right now? I don't know what the end game is because I can't get past the people are yelling at me anytime I say anything.
Listen to, I think one of the main chants that I hear, or the main cries out of this movement, is no justice, no peace. And I would add, knowing justice, you would know peace to that. And so the conversations that I've had online with people have turned towards, well, all lives matter. And I'm like, well, yes, but right now we're focused on Black Lives Mattering because they're just asking to matter so that systematically they're not being oppressed and they're not being considered different than others in the justice or the legal or the socioeconomic system. And that is, I believe, truly what's at the heart of it.
And it should be so easy, and it should be something that everybody's on board with, but I think the message gets lost in all the yelling.
Let me ask.
Practically, I think they're currently calling on defunding the police, which you had to come help me explain to somebody, if you remember, Chris, an old coworker, which doesn't mean taking all the money away from the police, but that's the main focus I've heard of the movement currently, which I hate as a white person to feel like I'm speaking for the whole Black Lives Matter movement, but that's the main cry I've heard from the movement so far, is to reallocating police funding towards social programs.
So
I think that's
let me jump in for a second, and let's look at the situations that occur, right? And guys, you can feel, for anybody who maybe thinks it's a little bit differently, I will tell you, I think the entire movement is about addressing police brutality, and it's about addressing the justice system that fails time and time again to hold police officers accountable. And the reason that I bring that up, and Mark and everybody else, I agree with you guys. I think the noise gets overwhelming, but every time it occurred, every time the outbreak, we'll just call it an outbreak, every time the outbreak occurs, it's for the exact same reason.
Yeah.
It's for a police officer killing an unarmed person, and the family, the community receiving very little, if no justice at all. One thing that I often talk about for these situations is, if you remember the LA riots, I think everybody here is old enough to remember the LA riots after Rodney King. Okay. Everybody remembers the riots. Nobody remembers those were after the acquittals. Everybody remembers Ferguson and St. Louis burning to the ground, and people forget, though, that was after the acquittals. For those of you that live in and around Orlando, for Trayvon Martin, it wasn't when Trayvon Martin was killed that everybody got upset. It was when George Zimmerman got away with it, for lack of better terms. And I think time and time again, the excuses and the swirl spiral out of control, but the exact reason they all start is this same damn thing every single time.
People get away with it.
People get away with it. And I think what it boils down to is, I was, again, I'll use my neighbor. I wish he was here, but it was a good conversation. But, we talked a lot about, and I've had a couple of others that are like, I don't understand why people are protesting now. I don't understand why people are rioting now. It had literally happened 3 or 4 days beforehand with George Floyd specifically. Why are people rioting now? Why not wait until, there's a trial? Because every person in the Black community knows the trial don't mean shit.
Yeah.
Like all the trial does is delay the inevitable. And there's a big part of me, actually, I'm going to jump ahead. One of the questions that I have on here is, how do you respond to riots or rioting? That'll be our next question, but I will give you my answer first. And my answer is, with all honesty, I can't sit here today as an American who cares about this country and cares about the people in it. I can't sit here today and tell you that I'm not fine with people burning shit down. I can't do that. There's a giant part of me that looks at it and goes, I don't want you to burn down Joe's liquor store, and I don't want you to burn down, Logan's Roadhouse. Like, I don't want you to do those. But if you want to tell me that this is a sheriff, or this is a police officer, or this is a city hall that refuses to take down Confederate statues, I can't tell you, I'm not starting the fire, but I don't mind that you started it. And that'll sound horrible, but the reason that I bring that up is because I think, going back to what we were talking about just a minute ago, the message gets lost because the noise just elevates. The excuses just start left and right.
I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the reasons that Black Lives Matter get lost is because Occupy Wall Street got lost. So there's no directive order of, who's in charge.
Well,
so,
actually, you're gonna steal one of my questions. So let's jump.
Oh, sorry, Chris.
No, that's fine. We'll come back to rioters in a minute. But who can explain the difference between Black Lives Matter, the movement, versus Black Lives Matter, the organization? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Nope.
Nope, I have no idea.
Shanika?
Oh, one, the organization is specifically police brutality. Like that is their main focus. That is like the mission for them. The other one is kind of split. Not split in a bad way, but just like their attention is divided. So it's, Black Lives Matter to help to stimulate the economy, kind of the Black Wall Street deal. And going from that direction, they're basically going from different directions for the same thing, but that's on paper from what I read is what splits them or separates them.
Chris, can I open a whole can of worms?
That's what this whole thing is, man. This is just worms everywhere. Go ahead.
It's a bit of a tangent, but police brutality and what's happening. Growing up in England, our police are very different to the police in the US. Like, our police don't have guns. People don't have guns. There's a whole can of worms here with the gun conversation. That aside, I remember, so when I moved to Florida, I was 18 years old, and I remember getting a speeding ticket, which, for the record, was brutally hard, just the backside of the Commons. They nailed me pretty good, and my ticket was over $200, and I was making $6 an hour, so it hurt. But I had never experienced that level of fear before from an officer, the way they approached the car and how he spoke, and there's this whole tense piece about like reaching for your insurance papers. And back then, I had no thoughts about the differences between what it would be as a white guy versus a black guy. But what I do know is in North America, and more so the US than Canada, there is a whole level of paranoia from the police. They approach everything from a very aggressive standpoint, where it's just like everyone's your enemy, trust no one. There is clearly an unbalance towards and an injustice towards how different ethnicities are treated. But it is intense, and there's no de-escalation in the police. And it's always just like so aggressive, and there's no level of like, let's try and everybody be calm. And that squarely, in my mind, lands on the shoulders of like horrendous training, deep-seated racism. Like there's so many issues. Like, and then you get like the handful of videos. It's like the good cop. I watched one cop playing hopscotch with a homeless lady. I'm like, this is what they should be fucking doing, is treating people as humans and having conversations. But there is just this level of like, get on the ground. This is like so aggressive. It's very hard for me to watch because it is so different to how I grew up. And I'm not saying like the UK police force are by no means perfect. The gun piece as a whole, it is, in my mind, it is completely related, but it's a whole other conversation in the sense that they have to treat the situation with a level of paranoia because they don't know who has a gun by their side. Whereas truthfully, when you have more gun control, that's less of a thing to be worried about. So it does change how you can react to a situation. But that's, as I said, it's opening a whole can of worms.
So I saw a piece on, I think it was on CNN the other day, which was pretty interesting. It was a guy who's used to be in the military, who's actually a trainer for a policeman. And he's trying to shift that because a lot of what they're trained to, from what I understand, is what they call the warrior mentality, which is the idea that, like you said, everybody is, you're assuming the worst about everybody instead of assuming the best. And I can see why in a war setting that maybe makes sense because anybody could, come after you. But when you're policing your communities, that doesn't make sense. And I agree that the whole gun thing raises the ante on both sides because, they don't know. And even if gun control is in place, the thing you always hear is, well, the bad guys are going to ignore that anyway and get the guns by the black market anyway. So we can't really control guns, is what I always hear, which doesn't make sense to me. But like you said, that's a sort of a separate topic, but it's related. But I think the mentality is the thing that needs to be addressed. The mentality of the way they train the policemen to do it. And it could be that the kind of people they're hiring are, aggressive by nature. That's probably how they get into the profession. But if they really, trained them the right way and then held them accountable. The other thing I don't think has been thrown out yet is the idea of police unions. I think they're the ones that often intervene and cause a lot of these things to go out of hand when it gets to getting justice through the court system, because and you saw this with the Atlanta policemen recently with the Rashard Brooks thing, that they were like, I'm not getting my due process. Well, the due process to them is I get my day in court with my union rep, and then maybe I get thrown up on charges, or maybe they just get me off and ignore the whole thing. So that the union part plays a huge role in the way those police incidents are handled and are swept under the rug.
Okay, so I really like Kelly and what Simon, both of you said, and I think you really grabbed onto what I was kind of thinking and I'm trying to say right now, is a lot of it is a culture problem. And I don't mean an American culture problem. I mean it is a police culture problem. It's very much well, we've always done it this way, so we're just going to keep doing it. You have some people who are on power trips and it feeds off of it. So you look at the cops that are truly aggressive, some of it is just a power trip. And I think a lot of enhanced training, a lot of monthly check-ins, a lot of psych evals would actually help that.
So Mark made a lot of really good points. I feel like that kind of profession tends to be a draw for a certain kind of person.
Yes.
May not be entirely. I grew up around police officers my entire life. My uncle was a retired police sergeant in Nashville. My local police department had something called Police Explorers, which is essentially like Boy Scouts, but you're learning about police stuff. Back then, it seemed different just from a child perspective, but growing up now, it seems to be completely different. You see a lot of people who are my age or younger getting into it, and they seem to be getting into it for some very weird reasons. Mm-hmm. They're very aggressive type of people who are quick to be confrontational, and you worry about that kind of person having that kind of authority, that kind of power. Yeah. It makes you kind of worry about, okay, are they not vetting officers like they should be? It makes you worry about what kind of people are getting in these positions and having that kind of control and power.
Anyway, so I have been listening the whole time, so it's fantastic to hear everybody. But one of the things that I was going to bring up is my uncle was before, and my neighbors growing up were also in the police force. And one of the things that they used to do, which I don't know if lots of police do this now, they were never really afraid when they went into neighborhoods that they policed, because they visited those neighborhoods outside of their policing job. Huh? Now we have a lot of times where police they're assigned to a certain area. They have no connection whatsoever with that community, though. So it's a lot easier to say that life right there means nothing to me. This is just my job, which it's a catch-22, right? Because as a police officer, you need to be careful. You need to know what your surroundings are. But there's not as fearful of individuals in a certain neighborhood when they know who those people are. If you've known little Jimmy since he was in 3rd grade, mm-hmm. and you're like, Jimmy, what the hell are you doing robbing this? Come on, dude. That's a little bit different than, oh my God, there's this big black man here, I'm so afraid. But yeah, when we were younger, their favorite thing to do, and nothing against anyone that plays video games, but Call of Duty and Splinter Cell, all of those games are their favorite games ever. And the sheer joy that happens when they make kills and blast heads, and I'm just like, we're giving you control over real guns in real lives, and you're this excited about a kill shot. That is disturbing on so many levels to me. But the other thing that that I think is missing a lot from policing in general, and that's on the back end of theirs, is that there's nothing for them for mental health. But think about what these officers are seeing day in and day out. That can take a toll on anyone. And the fact that we typically just say, all right, put a Band-Aid on it and get back out, that doesn't seem like it's the right thing. So when they talk about like defunding the police, a lot of things are going into, can we put some of that money, instead of buying grenade launchers for police officers, can we get them some mental health? Like those things being shifted, I'm totally okay with, because they need support just as much as everyone else does. But then you have that kind of pack mentality, which is, oh my gosh, you took one of my brothers, I'm taking all of your people now too, which goes both ways.
So let me actually, no, this is all very good stuff, and you guys are answering some questions as we go. So we're gonna bring it back a little bit. So I want to kind of go down to one of the big questions, really part of what sparked this whole idea of having a town hall. And this one's about to make some people uncomfortable. So here we go. Is the response all / Blue Lives Matter? Is that an appropriate response to Black Lives Matter? And I don't mean, is it a nice thing? I mean, in the core sense of what the two are arguing, is it even relevant? And here's the example that I'll use, and then we'll go from there. The example that I would use is oftentimes we hear things like, look at these officers putting their knees on George Floyd. That's terrible. We need police reform. And the response will be something along the lines of, and I'll use it because it's in my family, well, my brother-in-law is a police officer and he's a fantastic person, right? Everybody tends to relate it to the person that they know. And in no other conversation does that make any freaking sense at all. If I were to sit here and tell you, hey, I'm really angry about abortion, would you sit there and turn around and go, well, look at this woman that I know that had a baby. She's fantastic. Or, man, these tax breaks are freaking ridiculous around this place. We need to change our tax laws. Well, my accountant is a really good guy who tries to take care of his family. But for some odd reason, we allow, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all lives don't matter, blue lives don't matter, black lives matter. I'm not arguing either point. I'm saying, are they truly even counter arguments? Go ahead, Aaron. I see your hand up.
So I'm a teacher. There's all sorts of things that come out of pedophiles. I have never, ever thought to protect that teacher. That teacher's a pedophile. Get the fuck out. The end. And I don't understand the Blue Lives Matter in that regard, like just protecting their own. Like it doesn't make sense. If you're just protecting your own, you're not protecting the community.
So now that I understand that Black Lives Matter is primarily about speaking out against police brutality, saying, yeah, well, Blue Lives Matter is actually super insensitive. It's kind of like saying, I got beaten up on the playground, but now the guy that beat me up, well, his lives matter too. Well, yes, but maybe he should stop beating people up on the playground. So I think it's kind of like I think if people actually truly understood what the Black Lives Matter movement means, saying that Blue Lives Matter would be taken as more of kind of like a 50% insult at that point. I don't know if you can insult somebody halfway, but it could be used as kind of like a derogatory anti-Black Lives Matter if people truly knew what it meant.
Well, I think it basically goes back to what you were saying, Chris. It's just an illogical thing to bring into the conversation. It's just so off point. And I think, Mark, to what you were saying, it's generous to say that they're not aware of it, because I just see it as a deflection from actually looking at either the movement itself or a lot of the other issues that go into the organization?
So one of the things in particular with Blue Lives Matter, because I do have family that is also Blue Lives and they happen to be Black Lives, so yay them. It's one of those things that when you say, someone said earlier, it's dismissive because if I say Black Lives Matter, one, I'm not saying Black lives are the only lives that matter to begin with. That was never what that was supposed to be. So the fact that people respond to that with, well, Blue Lives Matter, they do, you're right, because lives matter. But like Bianca said earlier, the ones that we're looking at right now happen to be Black lives. And the other caveat to that is that at the end of the day, if I choose to be a police officer, at the end of the day, I can take my badge off. I can take my uniform off. I can take my gun off and put it on the table. What I can't take off is my skin. It stays with me no matter what. That's what people will see when I go anywhere. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, that was that cop I saw the other day. If I wanted to not be a cop anymore, I have that option. If I not want to be Black anymore, I'm not Rachel Dolezal, so that won't work for me.
We very clearly see examples of bad cops. And to be fair, we see clear examples of good cops. I think to be blatantly honest, there's good and there's bad. But I think the thing that concerns me is time and time again in all of these videos, whether it's the good cops or the bad cops, there's a army of just cops. They're not good. Yeah. They're not bad. They're just there. The guy with his knee on George Floyd's neck, that's one officer, but there's three others that are there. They're letting it happen. The 75-year-old man that got pushed down in Buffalo, it was two cops that pushed him down. One cop went to help, and about 26 other cops that just did nothing. And I feel like all too often we put cops on a pedestal that they're either all good and a handful of bad apples, or in some cases, the opposite of that is the police. But how do we handle the cops in the middle? Are they good cops? Are they bad cops? Or are they just doing their job? How do we handle those?
I think that a lot of the things I've seen with the George Floyd situation show that, there were three other cops there, right? And two of them were brand new cops. So my first question was, why is a guy who's had like 18 infractions against him training two new cops? Really bad idea. Second part of that is apathy is not an answer, especially when you're in an authority position, right? If you have an authority position, you're expected to act and do right all the time when you wear that uniform. And when you're not, you should be held accountable. If you're not held accountable, then you just get this pack mentality of, well, as long as I don't speak up, my brothers will protect me, right? And that's how you get this whole Blue Lives Matter thing, because it's basically reinforcing a pack mentality, right? Everybody else shut up while this guy's in trouble and he'll get off. So that's the problem I see with a lot of this is you can't just sort of be apathetic. You've got to be part of the answer or part of the problem. And if you're part of the problem, you got to be held accountable.
I think a lot of it comes down to peer pressure and that perception that if they speak out against somebody, especially a superior, higher ranking officer, that it will hurt their career.
The whole Blue Lives Matter movement is directly, it's so glaring to me how that really tells us how bad our systemic racism issue really is. Because in every other profession, we are allowed to say there are bad whatever. There are bad teachers. There are bad cops. There are, well, no, not cops. There are bad mental health therapists. There are bad personal trainers. There's bad doctors. But as soon as we say there are bad cops, there's this insane uproar, which to me is just so smack in your face that anyone that says Blue Lives Matter, like it boils my blood so much.
In 2015, Americans spent countless hours vehemently debating the color of a dress. Was it blue and black or was it white and gold? Keeping that in mind, compared to people losing their lives, is it fair to blame the media for perpetuating these stories?
I think the reason why the media gets blamed is I think that people, it's easier to choose another villain. They don't want to have the discussion. They don't want to, like we're doing right now, they don't want to address the problem head on. So it's easier to have a scapegoat. So to say that the media is instigating, it's just kind of a cop-out. It's deflection. I don't have to discuss the actual issue if I don't admit there is one. I think that's what's happening here with media.
What I say about the media in this whole portrayal of everything is the media, they sway the conversation. I mean, whenever it's a shooting of a Black person, there's always something negative that is portrayed about that Black person to villainize them to the mass public. Whenever it's a white person that's doing some mass shooting or whatever, it always drops back to that person having a mental illness, and it's something else that is the problem. And they're always painted as basically like a victim in this sad situation, versus when someone is gunned down for whatever reason, and it's everything that you can find negative. Oh, he was late to school this many times, he skipped school. This is just like digging and digging, trying to find something negative about that person of color, so it doesn't seem that it is that bad. But what I say is, who owns the media? And if the Tiki Torch whites own the media, they're the ones that basically, they push the story. They dictate how the story goes, what is portrayed. You see it in everything. You see it in movies. You see it how they tell the story of how people should respond to Black people. If all you ever see on a television set is these Black men walking down the street and white people are afraid, or these Black men, these Latinos, all these other people of color that are the bad guys, they're the gangsters, they're the villains, they're the murderers, they're all these other things, when people are going to be afraid and people are going to walk across the street because that's all they ever see on television. That's all that is portrayed in front of them, is this negative image of these people. So they're going to respond in that way. So the media does dictate the story.
Those are all very good points. And I think, again, and I'm going to jump back to the whole purpose of this channel for a little bit. I think what you talked about the story and what they're trying to do, one of the key things that I really want to try to get across to people is when you're listening to the media, regardless of the channel, right? You know, I know there's right wing, there's left wing, there's middle ground, there's all kinds of charts and graphs to show us who we should listen to and who we should trust. But I think it's very important to listen to what they're actually saying, right? You know, it's facts and beliefs, right? I believe Black people in the inner city can be dangerous because of whatever reason. But the fact is listen to what the reporter, listen to what the article is saying. Is an opinion article? You know, I've noticed across all spectrums, very frequently, it doesn't say it's an opinion article, but when you don't have any actual facts in there, it's a damn opinion article. You know, and then that becomes a fact when in reality, no, it was just an opinion to begin with. So I think, Kamika, thank you very much for jumping in. I think that's a very, very good insight on that. Erin, did you want to add to it now that you've resettled?
Yes. 24/7 media is an issue. I mean, my parents could stay up all day, all night, and watch whatever issue they want to fluff up. It doesn't even matter what show you watch, what channel you watch.
I think if you watch responsibly, if you apply a little bit of critical thinking to what you're seeing and sort of look for facts instead of opinion and follow the kind of the vitriol that they like to put into a lot of the stories, or the slant that goes into it, you can get news and information without necessarily letting it obsess you and form an opinion for you. It's just a little bit harder now than it used to be to find good objective sources.
Now we're going to dive back into the deep end. So we talked about riots a little bit earlier. Let's dive into that just a little bit more. How should people feel about riots?
I guess I didn't really think I fell in any of these complicated categories until right now, but I kind of feel the same way as what you said earlier. I don't necessarily support people rioting. but I also understand why they're doing it, and like I get it, and I'm not that mad about it. Like I don't want them burning down some old lady's store that she's worked 100 years to build back up, but I understand why everyone's angry, and I understand why they're rioting.
Yeah, I think it's important to consider the difference between rioting and protest, right? Protest is something we have constitutionally that we should do. I understand people's anger, but their anger is misplaced if they're using it to burn people's property. And if it's just to get people's attention, there's better ways to get attention, right? So it's a matter of put your anger into something that matters. Don't put it into burning down a police station or a small business or whatever,
Like
because
kneeling?
you're not going to get the kind of attention that you want. Let's put it that way. That's why a lot of the protesters are trying to distinguish themselves from the rioters, because they know the rioters aren't getting the play on the issue that they want.
I don't know if anybody else watches John Oliver, but I saw a clip at the end of his show last Sunday where they talked to a woman who was talking about the riots, and just I was in tears watching it because you could just hear the hurt and the anger and just so many years of frustration boiling over in her voice. I don't think she was participating in the riots because this was the day after it had happened, but I think she was trying to explain why some people felt the need to riot, and it was heartbreaking. He played a short clip, and as soon as I finished watching the show, I looked up the whole clip on Twitter, and the whole thing was heartbreaking. It was, yeah, exactly that. We don't know nothing. It was heartbreaking. I was in tears. It was so sad. And so after watching that, I felt like I understood a little bit more about why people were doing it. And I agree, not everyone that's rioting is doing it for this reason. Some people were just looking to cause chaos, like the guy here in Nashville that they arrested. I don't feel like he really cares about Black lives. I think he was just looking to cause a ruckus. But from her point of view, it really helped me understand why some of the people were so upset and felt that they didn't have any options left.
Well, I feel like it's hard for me to say understand, just because I've never experienced anything like what I witnessed in that video. When I saw that video, I was extremely angry. From an outside perspective, you're thinking like you're helpless. There's nothing you can do, and the bystanders, there's nothing they could do. They were basically Mr. Floyd's being guarded by a couple of officers threatening to pepper spray everybody in the face who got just close enough. As you could see, Mr. Floyd dying on the street right there. And I watched the video in its entirety after everything kind of went down, and I can empathize with the anger. I don't necessarily understand for sure the looting process of everything, but anger in the streets, fighting in frustration to get something that you feel like is just never going to want to go away willingly. I mean, it makes sense to me. But I also feel like there is the media's draw to depicting stuff to make it seem as if like it's bending a certain way. So depicting everything as violent riots when it's just protests because it's good television. It has people conceived all of these protests and to be like that. In Nashville, we've had a few pretty much repeatedly in Legislative Plaza, and they're all have been peaceful. Chanting. I even saw a guy with a full drum kit over the weekend, just the chants and everything. And all they're trying to do is get in to speak to the legislator because legislative's in session. So I don't know. I mean, I know the riots occurred, those in the streets occurred, but I feel like that's just a small part of all of the protests, the peaceful gatherings, not necessarily the ones that are, causing fires and stuff. I feel like they're trying to spin it like all of those are going to be like that when they're not.
So let me ask this loaded question here, and this is kind of going back to the whether you support riots and looting and fires versus you support peaceful protest. The loaded question that I always ask, and some of you have probably seen it, so brace for impact. Tell us the proper way to protest.
If you take away the rights from somebody else, you're wrong. And what I mean by that is I do a lot of what my actions are is dictated by how I want is keeping my family safe. And my whole point is, eventually it's your house that gets burned down. Eventually the rioters get to your house. And I would be super concerned if the rioters made it to my mom's. Everybody's all big and bad about, like a lot of people are okay with the looting and the rioting, but then all of a sudden it's on your front doorstep, and then what do you do?
And I think, to me, and I'm going to kind of steer into one of our questions here for a minute, and it was really directed towards the All Lives Matter, but when these issues come up, right, one of the things that gets brought up when we talk about rioting and looting is, now our police officers are out there. Now we're worried about their safety. Now officers are having to work double, sometimes triple shifts. Now they're having to put on riot gear. They're at the front line of these arguments. Okay? So is dismissing the Black Lives Matter movement or any other movement, is dismissing those actually putting our officers in more harm than keeping them safer?
Yes.
Yeah, why are police officers wearing riot gear to look after a peaceful protest? I mean, it's for me, if that happens, there's definitely some ulterior motive, or they know something or want something to happen, and I'm not sure which that is.
I don't know. We'll talk about that one in a minute. But my ultimate question is, does dismissing it, or anybody that goes down the Blue Lives Matter path, does that actually put our officers in more harm by not having the conversation, because it's only going to happen again? And it will only continue to escalate. We talked about the LA riots in '92. Now we're talking about nationwide riots because we haven't done jack about it.
I think so. I think it's actually puts more officers' lives on the line just because we haven't fixed the problem.
The very first night when everything started happening, I'm sure many of us were watching on Facebook Live. People were streaming stuff all over the place. And that night, I feel like, it was shocking. And, I did feel scared for what was going on. But I also felt like in those fires, you could see the 400 years of oppression. And in those fires, you could see the anger that was allowed to get to this point by not just oppressors or people who are racist or police officers that do bad things, but just in general. Finally people are listening, finally. And it took those riots. I feel like if it would have just been peaceful protests, which in many cases were very moving. It's hard to see, yes, people's businesses burning down, definitely, and I don't want to take away from that. But I feel like if they burned my business down to get their point across, finally, after 400 years, let it burn.
Boyae, you might have to fact check me on this because it's going to take me a minute to find this. My understanding is that a lot of the rioters and the looters were not Black Lives Matters, and some of them were actually white supremacists acting basically as a wolf in sheep clothing to undermine the Black Lives Matter movement. And again, I need to look up numbers, but if I told you that was the case, would it change your mind?
If it were people just trying to cause a scene, it's hard. Yes, I hate that it would be taken to that extreme by people who are just trying to cause scenes, who are not doing things with good intention for real change to happen in this country. But I honestly don't feel like it would change my opinion in that people tried peacefully for so long. For so very long, and it was upsetting in my mind to hear so many people talk about. Martin Luther King was just getting thrown in everything, and rightfully, but at some point, like I would just think, he tried so hard to do things peacefully and he was killed. And so many times they've tried to do things peacefully and it just has come with little to no results. And so many Black people have been killed by police officers and nothing was done. And when those police, and by the way, my husband is a law enforcement officer. I'll just throw that in there. When the police station was on fire, I think it was in Minneapolis, and I just remember thinking, like, maybe they'll listen now.
So Vanessa, I'll jump in just a little bit and sort of echo kind of what you said. And Mark, to answer your question, I don't care. I honestly don't care what their intent was, because for two main reasons, and I know that sounds cold-blooded, but it's for two main reasons. One, because we have not talked about it time and time again in the past, as a society, we gave them this opportunity. Because we continue to not address the actual issues, and because we just keep kicking the can down the road, we gave that anarchist the opportunity to go and light a fire or to loot a building, instead of years ago having the conversations to address police reform. That's why the people were on the street to begin with, is because of that. So because we gave them that opportunity, while you don't want anybody hurt, you don't want, obviously anybody killed. At the end of the day, though, if we continue to give them that platform, then that's on us as a society. The second thing is, and this to me is always my counter argument for, well, what about the rioters and the looters? Insurance and going to jail. Because the whole conversation stems around, hey, unarmed person, and I don't care if they're Black, white, Hispanic, Japanese, I don't care. Unarmed American is killed by a police officer gets away with it. That's the problem. Now, the other side of that is white, Black, Hispanic, Japanese person, don't care, lights a government building on fire, or, lights Joe's liquor store on fire. Police arrest them, they go to jail, they're convicted. And the insurance company pays for most of it. And I understand insurance isn't going to cover all of it. And I know it's still a detriment. But to sit there and add like they're equal, in my opinion, they're not. They're
But
not.
Chris, where does insurance money come from?
Well, from fire damage, from looting, from police.
No. Where does the money come from?
I see a hand raised.
Pay into.
Okay, it comes from everybody that pays in. So eventually, everybody that is paying for the insurance, it comes from everybody. So everybody is paying for that.
So
that's my point. So it hurts everybody.
I would argue that from an insurance perspective, if 360 million Americans have to chip in to rebuild Joe's liquor store at a fraction of a penny, that is by far a price that I'm willing to pay to prevent George Floyd from losing his life.
But yeah. what I'm saying is you're making a choice for somebody else.
The problem is that I'm not making the decision for Joe. It's the mob is making the decision for Joe that they're going to burn down his liquor store, okay? But the problem is that, for example, Colin Kaepernick has been trying to have a conversation for how long, and nobody listened. And the system just quietly shushed him and shoved him off to the side. And how many other people have died through police brutality because people didn't burn the liquor store down? I'm not saying it's legal to burn the liquor store to the ground when you're mad. I'm saying that oppression is a systemic holding down of some group because of differences. And when there hits a boiling point, and if the oppressing group is not held accountable to in some manner, way, shape, or form, it just continues. And it's not, I feel like the country at this point has reached a point where it's not going to be allowed to just continue quietly.
So my question for you is, are you willing to let a mob burn down your mother's house in retaliation?
And I will tell you without a shadow of a doubt, I would absolutely let my house burn down if it caused police officers around the country to be held accountable for killing people. Absolutely.
I would too.
I get where you're going, and it is a very valid question. And I understand that, and I see kind of in the comments, like, you hope it's something else. You hope logic jumps in. You hope all of these things. But hopes and wishes and prayers have accomplished absolutely zero in this debate. You know, we talk Martin Luther King, guys, that was half a decade ago, you know, or actually, what, almost 80 years ago at this point? 40 years? I don't know. My math is off. It's late. But I can also tell you, even comparison to that, like, I've been listening to some old school rap from the early 80s and 90s. Those lyrics apply today, and that's 40 years ago. We're not making any headway. And I think at the end of the day, if you were to say it's your house that gets burned down, it's your kids' schools, then at the end of the day, honestly, Mark, I'm going to be blatantly honest. If it prevents a war in the future, and for us to have the conversation now, you can burn some shit down today, as far as I'm concerned.
But the kind of question that I'm wondering is, if we're talking that the protesting doesn't work, and we're upset with the rioting and the looting and the property damage and all of that here, and we're very much aware of gerrymandering and voter suppression happening very prevalent today. We're seeing it happening right now in Kentucky. How are Black and brown people and people who feel they're being oppressed going to get their voices heard? Because they can't do it the legal way, right? Because we're muting their voices. So I think at this point, they have no obligation other than to make themselves physically known.
I just wonder if making themselves physically known is going to drive the change they hope for. I mean, I agree that they may be out of choices, but when it just becomes another news cycle of something provocative to follow, and then it falls off by the wayside, do they get the change they want? I mean, that's really the question, is what does it take to drive the change? And I don't know that setting fires night after night, or for bigger fires, whatever, I don't know that that's going to drive the change that people want. So we got to figure out a better way to drive change. And it is about having a conversation. It is about getting, laws changed and things like that. And it's hard to do when you're a minority. But I like I said at one point in the conversation, I think the fact that people from a lot of different races are getting involved shows you that more people care about it now than ever before. But I don't want the provocative stuff to override the actual ability for change to happen.
Right. We're having this conversation now, and I think that's a positive step.
So I will tell you, Kelly, one thing that I think maybe is a little bit different, right? And I guys, when I say like burn it all down, like I'm obviously, I want other things to happen before we get to that point. But I think one thing that is different, and we talked before about a lot of the times the riots and the looting happens after the fact, right? We talk about later down the road at the acquittal. And I think one thing that is incredibly different right now is the fact that people are rioting before we even have an outcome. And I'll tell you how change happens at this point. Change happens here because before these instances, you would have a known thought. I mean, you don't know this, right? We're not in those conversations. But I can guarantee you that mayors, police chiefs, district attorneys, governors would have looked at this situation and said, okay, what can we do to help our officers out? Or at least some of them would. Some of them would have had the conversation of, what can we do to help our officers? And what is different right now is I can guarantee you there is no office in Minnesota that's making that call, because they have fully seen that they are prepared to burn that state to the ground if those officers get acquitted. And I think when you talk about change, is that positive? Well, it's positive that outside forces aren't going to impact the outcome. They're not going to, as much as they would have. They probably still will to a certain degree. I mean, it's naive to think they're not going to do anything. But I think some of the powers that be maybe aren't making those same phone calls because there's somebody else that's like, guys, we can't have our stuff burned down like this.
I think the responses to some similar issues with police recently, they've been acted on much quicker. The police forces have been quicker to arrest the officers, to suspend them, to call them out. So I think it's an incremental change, and it's not solving everything, but I think some of those things have come to light, and it is pressuring local governments to react in a more rational way than to let an officer continue working or be on administrative leave after they've murdered someone.
So my question is, what are our action items? Where do we go from here?
Mark, I'll chime in.
Okay.
One of these things that could come out of this is word of mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to have that same word of mouth, right? But outside of just this community of the 19 or that is a start. That's going to help change in the long run, and not to be afraid, right? And I need to have those more frank conversations. So spreading this simple word of mouth, and that will hopefully lead to your voting and to making those policy changes.
I think one thing too, Mark, you know, when I talk about next steps, you know, my next step, you're in it. This was my next step. You know, my next step was, okay, I've got a platform, not afraid to rock the boat a little bit. Let's send out an invite to 300 some odd people and see what happens, you know, and try to get a conversation going, try to get some learning and some knowledge going. And then, you know, for me, I'm going to share the video, and I'm going to continue to, you know, while Boyae may avoid the social media fight, I'm going to jump in it hand and foot. I will be there arguing with anybody, because that's what I feel comfortable with. It's what I feel I can do, because I know there's other people that won't, you know, but I'll also be the first to admit that you're not going to catch me at a protest. You're not. I'm not going to be one of those people marching. I'm not going to be on the street, and I'm not saying I don't support them. Obviously I do. But to me, I personally don't see the value in that, because I don't get anything from it. And I know that's a very selfish perspective to say I and me, but I don't see the value in that. I would much rather take 20 individuals and try to have a reasonable conversation, arming them with more information, more courage, more allies, right? I mean, like, everybody here met people that they haven't met before.
Yeah.
You know, and to understand, okay, we can get each other's backs. We can go forward. You know, Bianca, I admire her ability to fire off stuff towards state representatives and city representatives. And if that's your thing, do that. You know, this is such a big problem. There isn't one way to tackle it. It's tackle it every way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if we've talked about war before, and if we're going that route, you don't win a war with one tactic. You win it with multiple tactics, you know, and that's really what we've got to be doing right now. You know, it's learning and hearing from each other, but it's also doing what you feel comfortable with and moving forward with that.
In my experience, I think one of the best things you can do is to be supportive of folks in the excluded group. In this case, whether it's as simple as like you overhearing a conversation and going, wait a minute, and just like stepping in and questioning people's motivations for their thought. Like, if you hear people talking in a manner that, just think about what drives the intentions and why the excluded group feels hurt. I missed the beginning of the conversation, and just be an ally. Like Chris said, the best thing you can do is be an ally all day, every day, and everything you do, look for opportunities to be an ally.
And so my question is, how do we get, 5 more people? How do we get 50 more people? So, that's my question. It's like, we've got a lot of people who are obviously very passionate about it. It's like, how do we get somebody that's like, meh, I don't really care. Like, what can we do to get, somebody else in the door that might not care before, but now they're interested in these kinds of issues.
I've talked about the law of innovation and diffusion earlier, and Shanika's going to laugh when I say this. There's also another great video out there that's called How to Start a Movement. And if you haven't seen it on YouTube, go look up How to Start a Movement. And what it talks about is you start a movement by one crazy person. That one crazy person does what no one else is willing to do. That one crazy person is willing to get up and have the conversation and have the courage, or act like an idiot, or start the tough debate, or do whatever. But that person is not the important person. That's not the one you care about. What you care about is the second person. What you care about is the second person that joins into that conversation, and how much do they feel like they're appreciated? How much does the crazy person acknowledge the second person? How much do they turn around and say, hey, thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for letting your voice be heard. Thank you for starting the fight. And then the third person joins. And both of you then turn around and welcome that third person. And you praise them. and you help them and you move them forward. And you just keep doing that until you reach the tipping point. And when that tipping point happens, then it becomes uncool to not be part of that group, right? Then it's not cool to be part of the group that wants to fight racism. And to be fair, like, I know we've talked a lot about some doom and gloom. There is a part of me that has some hope through this. Like, it's 4 weeks later and we're actually still talking about it. You know, that gives me some hope. So maybe we're inching closer to that tipping point, but that's how you do it. You basically turn around and you have a conversation, or you see one of your friends fighting, you jump in, help them, you thank them for doing a damn good job, for having the courage to stick up there, because you had to do it. You had to have the courage to stand up there and start that fight. You know, Tony and I have probably talked more in the past 3 weeks than we've talked working together. But a lot of it is, hey, I appreciated what he was doing. I appreciated he was having to fight the same type of people that I've been having to fight. It's my family, it's my friends, it's the people from where I came from, that you're sitting there going, how are we having this conversation right now? But you do it that way, by encouraging others. You know, that to me is how you truly do it. The tactic doesn't matter. You'll find somebody that wants to write to Congress or march, or you'll find other people that want to do the same thing that you want to do. You just encourage them from that point going forward.
Like, to Chris's point, there's a place in the movement for everything and everyone. We have to fight differently than how we fought 60 years, or how our parents and grandparents fought 60 years ago, right? Because it's a different fight. So no way is a bad way as long as we are hurt. So however you best do that, however you best communicate, that is what you do. So whether it's through your art, through logistics, through anything like that, do it.
And then encourage others when they do it as well. All right, those are some very great finishing statements. I want to thank you guys for joining. Hopefully you found it successful. By all means, you know, obviously the event will still be up there. I'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to fire away what you liked, what you didn't like in the comments. Not going to hurt my feelings at all. Obviously, I liked it. There's a part of me that feels like, you know, maybe trying to have a few more of these in the future. There's all kinds of different hot buttons out there. But again, guys, thank you. I know this conversation isn't easy, nor is it always fun. But thank you for taking your time. Thank you for interacting with some people that you probably didn't even know. And I want to thank you guys. And as a self-plug, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, because it's going to be up here shortly. All right, thank you guys. Have a good evening, and I appreciate you joining. Thank you for watching this segment from our conversation about race in America. I'd like to thank all the participants, as well as Boyae, Shanika, and Bianca, for helping to conduct the session. To see more segments from the conversation, or to see the conversation in its entirety, make sure to subscribe to Political Us. More Town Hall videos about race in America will be posted over the next few days. And please continue to support the channel as we work to make politics more about us.